Hi, I'm Dr. Jeff Sheldon, and I am a lecturer in social science research methods, evaluation theory, and evaluation practice at the University of San Diego. And today's presentation is about a study I did in the recent past on empowerment evaluation, because I was interested to see if empowerment evaluation, if implemented the way that it's intended to be implemented, actually leads to empowerment and self-determination outcomes. And so when we talk about empowerment evaluation, we talk about practices, okay, the way that the activities of empowerment evaluations, and then the principles of empowerment evaluation, which are both process-oriented and outcome-oriented. So without further ado, let me get into let me see if I can share my screen with you, and we'll go through the study. And because I'm recording this, if you have questions and comments, my contact information is on the final slide, so don't hesitate to get in touch with me. Okay, so let's see if we can actually get this screen to do some sharing here. Okay, hang on a second here. Okay. So I'm going to, the screen sharing function doesn't really work all that well for some reason. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to try and we're going to have to go at it from in this way. So as you can tell, so the topic of conversation is evaluation as social intervention, an empirical study of empowerment evaluation, practices and principal effects on psychological empowerment and self-determination outcomes. So when we talk about empowerment and self-determination, they are in fact constructs in social psychology. Okay, so here's what we're going to talk about today. Here's the little overview. I want to do a conceptual primer on what empowerment theory is, what self-determination theory is, what a social intervention is, and then talk a little bit about empowerment evaluation, kind of break it down. Then we're going to talk about the concerns about empowerment evaluation from the evaluation theorists and commentators. As you probably are well aware, most evaluation theories, I guess you want to call it that, whether in application or as a sort of a theoretical grounding, are always subject to criticism. So, and certainly empowerment evaluation, there's plenty of criticism. So we'll go talk about why it's important, why it was important for me to do research on empowerment evaluation, why I thought it was necessary. Then we'll go through the kind of the machinations of the study. We'll talk about the research questions, talk about the methodology and analytical strategy, the survey design, the sampling rationale and procedures, certainly, participant characteristics, right? Because, and the reason why I want to include that is because a very good percentage of the respondents to my survey are from African countries. So I think it's important to share with you that information. So the results and takeaways from research questions 1 through 3, and then the results and implications for practice and policy from research question 4. Then we'll talk a little bit about the strengths and the weaknesses of the study, because every study, as you know, it's got strengths and it's got limitations, and mine was no exception. Then we'll do sort of recommendations for future research on empowerment evaluation, give you my conclusions, and then you'll have my contact information. So, okay, without further ado, let's talk about empowerment theory. So, as you can see from the slide, maybe I can make this a little bit bigger for us here. There we go. Okay, that's a little bit better. So let's talk a little bit about empowerment theory. And empowerment theory it's a long-term process that individuals and communities undertake for themselves. Okay, no one, and you often hear, well, I'm going to empower this person, or I'm going to empower that group of people. Well, that is not the way empowerment actually works. Empowerment works, if you're interested in empowering a group of people through some sort of intervention, some sort of program, well, what you do is you set up you create a context in which empowerment will actually take place. Okay, so it's not something we do, for other people. Okay, that's it's a misconception that I want to make sure that everyone's clear on. So empowered outcomes for individuals or even aggregate bodies of individuals like organizations, okay, engaging when you're empowered, you engage in certain behaviors that sort of permit an effective pursuit of planned social change. So empowerment is really, to a large extent, it's about social change, changing the dynamic. Okay, and we talk about, especially in disrupting, negative, damaging social norms, which oppress and marginalize people. So that empowerment is about kind of creating a certain amount of social change. So the question is, what does it look like when people are in fact empowered? Well, they work with others, they manage their own resources, they learn decision-making skills, they're able to influence policy, they're able to access government at all levels. They share leadership, they're able to obtain needed resources. So it's not just about managing the resources, but it's about obtaining them as well, and being networked to others. So and that it's important because a lot of change that happens is based on intersubjectivity. It's about people to people interactions, and it's through those interactions, through that sort of the communicative aspect of empowerment, that change actually happens. So there's three interrelated components. Now we're kind of getting into the theory here. So the three interrelated components, and this comes from the researchers Zimmerman, Israel, Schultz, and Checkaway, is that it's interaction. The first component is interactional. So it's people are developing knowledge, skills, strategies to become leaders and advocates for change. Okay, so so one of the keys, it's knowledge and skills. Okay, that's then when we we get back into the study a little bit more, I'll talk about knowledge and skills, because we're talking about an evaluation, a type of evaluation in which there is a process, and so it's people learn knowledge when they're taking part in empowerment evaluations. They're gaining knowledge about evaluation and developing skills to be able to conduct their own evaluations. There's also an interpersonal component. So it's an appraisal, or people develop an appraisal or critical awareness of, and the motivation and agency to change their life circumstances, which is also known as self-efficacy. Okay, so so it's you develop this awareness, and through this awareness that you develop awareness that you can, if you have knowledge, you have skills about something, then you are aware that because you have knowledge and skills, then you sort of develop this, you're able to develop this agency, okay, this self-efficacy, that you can actually use knowledge and skills to create change. So it's actually putting knowledge and skills into practice. And then there's a behavioral component, and this is where, at an individual level, but needing some kind of guidance, some kind of leadership, we're able to take actions, okay, that benefit not only ourselves, but other individuals and the communities and the community in which we live, by influencing policy. So there's this interactional component this interactional component when we develop knowledge and skills about something, perhaps about creating some social policy or being able to influence social policy. Then there's the interpersonal, where we realize we can use the knowledge and skills to create change. And then there's this behavioral component, which, we actually kind of like the end result, or kind of like once we engage in, using our knowledge and skills, then we're actually, influencing social policy. Okay, so what is social determination theory? Well, it's a general theory of human motivation, and it's organized around three sets of motivational processes: intrinsic, which is within ourselves, okay, extrinsic, which is outside of ourselves, and amotivational, which is, it's kind of like we're not motivated to do anything, or things that occur which keep us, just hold us back from behaving or doing the things that we want to do. And so, these three processes and the relationship to self-determined behaviors. Again, remember, empowerment is about behavior. Okay, self-determination is about behavior as well. Which, these behaviors have to do with free, the exercise of free will, and you have a determination. You can determine your own fate, your own course of action, without anybody on the outside telling you what you have to do. You decide what it is that you want to do, and then you act accordingly. So to be self-determined, move this up a little bit, and that is to, when you're determined, you are experiencing well-being, you're having optimal health, which includes self-esteem, self-actualization, vitality, positive affect, and work engagement. So to be self-determination, people have to satisfy three basic psychological needs, which, according to Kestner, Ryan, Burjeni, and Holt, are endowed by nature. So these are things that are inherent within us, okay? And so these three things are competence, which is the efficacious performance of behaviors based on positive feedback and communication, which means that if you're doing something, somebody comes along and says, hey, you're doing a really great job at that. Well, you feel like you feel competent. You feel like someone recognizes the fact that you are, in fact, doing a good job. You're performing something at a really high level, or you're something to that effect anyway. But then you have this feeling that you are competent, that you're able to behave and do things, and you're to a really good effect. Then there's autonomy, which means that you can choose the kinds of tasks you want to perform. You can choose, something, whatever it is that you want to do, whatever is out there for you to, whether tasks are available for you to work on, you have the choice. You can either choose to work at it or not work at it. But the reason why you choose to perform something is because you recognize that it's important, okay? And that you recognize that it's important, and that someone tells you, or either you or someone else tells you that this task, the importance of this task is, other people acknowledge it and you acknowledge it yourself. So when you're autonomous, you choose the tasks you want, and the reason why you choose doing those tasks is because you think it's important, and you feel that the task what you're going to do is going to be acknowledged, okay? And then there's relatedness. And relatedness has to do with meaningful connections that you have with other people, and a sense of belonging to a group. That there's it's when so it's basically, you have a sense, you feel belonging to an organization or what have you. And so it's the opposite of feeling, of being alienated and isolated. And when you are part of a group, you feel like you've chosen to join a group, then it's part of you, who you are. It's part of your authentic self. So you don't feel inauthentic, you feel authentic. Okay, so the collective research on social determination theory suggests that when these basic psychological needs are supported, then you have intrinsic motivation and something called integrated extrinsic motivation as the likely results. Okay, so what intrinsic motivation means when you feel competent, when you feel like you're making decisions for yourself, when you feel like you're part of a group, part of a collective, then you feel, then everything that you do is motivated from within yourself. It's what you decide you're going to do. But then there's also this sort of integrated extrinsic motivation where something is, something outside of yourself, but you're able to take whatever is going on around you, and you're able to integrate that into your own, into your own sense of self-motivation. So it's like it's the sort of very similar to intrinsic motivation, but you're doing something that maybe someone else may want you to do it, but you wouldn't necessarily do it on your own. But then at some point in time, you kind of make a decision that what it is that someone wants you to do, or they're suggesting you do, it fits in with your own sense of competence and autonomy and relatedness. Okay. Kind of a complicated thing, but be that as it may, with self-determination, you're able to do you have free will, and you have agency to do the things that you want to do. Okay. All right. So what is a social intervention? Well, it's a liberating process, okay, which helps to eradicate those factors around us which contribute to disempowerment. So in other words, it's fostering empowerment, and it also increases self-determination through, again, this is part, it increases when you look at sort of the relatedness aspect of self-determination. Well, a social intervention kind of helps you to connect to a larger social collective. So I guess you could say that this social intervention and the relatedness aspect of self-determination are very closely integrated. So social intervention and social interventions are things that we can create. We can create a social intervention if that's something we feel like it's necessary to help people to like, remember I said to create a context in which empowerment and self-determination take place. Well, the social intervention would be that context. Okay, so the idea is that social intervention is committed to this vision of social justice. So when we're empowering, we create a context in which empowerment and self-determination are likely to occur. Okay, it's because we're doing it for the sake of social justice. So the fundamental goal, and I'll read this, the fundamental goal of the social intervention is to ensure individuals and groups have the power to influence the direction of their lives. It sounds very much like empowerment and self-determination, and of their social institutions on their own behalf. So people are able to take action. They feel emboldened to take action and change the course of events in their lives, to change the social institutions, which, when we talk about social institutions, we talk about greater society and talk about social structure at multiple levels. And so you're able to, when you have a social intervention will, helps people to pressure or influence the structures in society which keep them oppressed and marginalized. And that ties in very much with this idea of social justice. So characteristically, it's a participatory, a collective activity which encourages, remember I said this is very interactional, very intersubjective. So it encourages person-to-person interaction and fostering a sense of mutual support, rather than, if a person's in a program, the program doesn't foster this sense of support, this sense of collective identity. Okay, it's interaction. It's when people are talking to each other and engaging with one another. That's where the social intervention actually takes place. And it's through a collective identity that emerges okay? And like I said, it's communicatively secured and in turn makes possible the emergence of collective political agency. So basically what you're doing is you're taking sort of the individual empowerment, a social intervention will kind of foster empowerment and self-determination, but it'll in individuals certainly, but then it kind of coalesces all that individual empowerment, the feeling of empowerment, this feeling of self-determination, and collectively you kind of melding it together so that in a collection, so that there's political agency, which means that people have, they can influence the political structures, like I said, that that continue to oppress and marginalize people. So that's what a social intervention is, and it's um, so this is the interesting thing. This is the last thing on social intervention, that in evaluation. Okay, so you have this, you have a social intervention, and then you have this political agency, and it's really the evaluation that serves as this kind of a connector. The evaluation is the connector between the needs and the interests that people have about the changes they want to see, and then the actual, the influence on social policy formation, or the creation of new social policies in which they directly benefit. Okay. So let's see what else we got here. Okay, empowerment evaluation. So it's as I said, because my value orientation is, it's ground. My values are grounded in social and clinical. Community psychology, and so empowerment evaluation is in fact grounded to a very large extent in community psychology, and so it's ideological in nature. It's not to say that it doesn't, you can't assess the value and worth of a program or an intervention or project or what have you, but it's ideological. So it's in nature, it's democratic. So everyone who participates in an empowerment evaluation, has equal say in the way that the evaluation is carried out. It facilitates an examination of important issues, in a, and those issues tend to be the social conditions in which the empowerment evaluation is taking place, or for the intended purpose of the empowerment evaluation. Okay, the conditions that need to be changed, and is done so in a very communicative and collective forum. So again, so you see that this is, empowerment evaluation draws upon, the very essence of empowerment and self-determination. And so the evaluator and the evaluation participants, they learn from each other. Okay, so again, it's grounded, as a social intervention, it's grounded in personal interactions, it's grounded in communication. Okay, and so the evaluator, and the evaluation participants are equals, and they co-create knowledge, okay, together. So it's a mutually supportive endeavor. It comes under the umbrella of stakeholder-involved evaluation approaches, which include participatory, collaborative, democratic, and utilization focused. And to a large extent, if you know what the evaluation theory tree is, Elkin and Christie's evaluation theory tree, well, one of the branches is values. And so there's a lot of people in the evaluation field which, who resonate with this idea of a value-laden evaluation approach. So you take into consideration, it's not just, well, let me just say, it's the opposite of that would be just kind of a positivist approach where you're doing sort of randomized control trials. So this takes into consideration people's perspectives. It's more subjective. It's more constructivist, if you want to call it that. It's more, there's perhaps a little bit more critical theorist embedded in empowerment evaluation. So, so it resonates. There are certain people, like I said early on, I have my value orientation is certainly grounded in empowerment and self-determination. So it resonates with me because of the purported outcomes of empowerment evaluation, which are empowerment and self-determination. So so it does resonate with people, and as I said, it does have an overt political agenda of changing power differentials. All right. So again, you're creating this collective political agency so you can change power differentials. And the power, as we know, is held within social structures by basically the people that make the rules and have the money. So, and it creates a hierarchy. It kind of creates a hierarchy. So empowerment evaluation is designed to break up that hierarchy, okay, to create a more equitable society, if you want to call it that. So, and it's hard to conceptualize how this can happen, but I think when we get through this, go through a little bit more, you'll start seeing how empowerment evaluation actually works. So it's a process that facilitates the development of control over the fate of people joined by their relationship to a social program. So it's the social program is whatever the program is that is designed to impact or influence political agent, to create political agency. So these people are joined together. They're in this program, and they're interacting, and they're communicating, and they're sharing, and so so being in that milieu sort of creates a sense of control. Oh, okay, it's a sense of control over your fate, over your collective fate, if you want to call it that. So that's and you can see how it ties into empowerment theory, self-determination theory, and this idea of being a social intervention. Okay, let's go up here a little bit. A little bit more on empowerment. We've got to think a couple more slides of this. So its intended outcome is increasing the participants' perception of their own empowerment and self-determination. As I've been saying all along, it's less about assessing a program's merit or worth. Ironically, though, it's in the process of assessing a program or a project or interventions merit or worth. That's how the empowerment and self-determination are purported to take place. Okay, or the increase in self-determination, the increase in empowerment. So it's by engaging in a process as we think of evaluation, we think of following a system, following a structure, having evaluation questions and design, creating our evaluation design and implementing, and having procedures and methods and things like that. And that's, designed to determine whether an intervention or program works or it doesn't work, if having an impact or not having an impact, having some kind, it's meeting its intended outcomes or not meeting its intended outcomes. So so that's the assessing the merit or worth aspect of it, but that's not the focus of empowerment evaluation. It's the process people are engaged in to, assess merit or worth that fosters the empowerment and self-determination. That's what, when we talk about a social intervention, you're talking about creating the context by being engaged in a process through which empowerment and self-determination are supposed to occur. So it means that when people are able to help themselves, as they build their evaluation capacity and a sense of community, referred to as a community of practice. So when you develop, when you're taking part in the process, when you're learning how to conduct evaluations, when you're developing that evaluation capacity, when you're developing knowledge about evaluation and skills around evaluation, and you're then able to, you feel like you're competent, and you're doing this in a setting in which you're doing it collectively with other people, and you're developing this little community of practice, the practice being of evaluation. So that's, again, this ties into the communicative aspect of a social intervention, the interaction between people. And it's through the process, the collective process of working together, that evaluation capacity is built. And once you have evaluation capacity, you can use your evaluation, use that capacity for bringing issues, bringing issues that oppress and marginalize people, bringing that, the findings of those studies, being able to use those findings, to influence policy, influence decision making. Because data, we are a data-driven society. So teaching people to create their own data, to generate their own data and interpret that data, and then being able to use the findings, having the self-efficacy to use the findings. Use objective, research methods to come up with objective and valid research methods, to come up with valid findings, and using those findings to promote social change. So there's two purported advantages, which of empowerment evaluation would speak to psychological well-being. One is self-sufficiency, which think about empowerment, think about self-determination. And then it's this idea of liberation or freedom or emancipation from traditional and persisting expectation, roles, and constraints imposed by others. So the social structure, the society in which we live, which has oppressive and marginalizing social norms, we're able to use empowerment evaluation as a tool for liberation. And I think this is the last slide on empowerment evaluation. Just now, it's kind of more into the way that what it looks like. So it's distinguished from the other stakeholder evaluation approaches by its 10 guiding principles. And as I said earlier, that empowerment evaluation is very much grounded in community psychology, but also in participatory action research, which kind of speaks to the ideological nature of empowerment evaluation, and the values, kind of its values orientation, in which people are included in the process of the evaluation. People are not just research subjects. No, they are part of the empowerment evaluation. So that's important. So the guiding principles are divided into process principles, which are principles that when people are going through and are taking part in the evaluation, these are the principles that are sort of manifesting themselves. So there are 6 process principles, and those are community ownership. So remember, we talked about this is a community of practice. Well, this community of this group of people who are taking part in the empowerment evaluation have a sense of ownership over the evaluation. The next one is inclusiveness, where everyone who wants to be part of the evaluation is taking part in it. Democratic participation, everyone has a say in how the evaluation is taking place. Now, that's not to say that people who don't know about evaluation and don't have the background in research, social science research methodology, just kind of have carte blanche in how to run the evaluation. No, because that's where the evaluator is. The evaluator is kind of guiding, coaching, and mentoring the process. But people, as they're, people have a say, even with that guidance and that mentoring and coaching, they have a kind of a say in what is going to take place in that evaluation. There's community knowledge in which everyone's generating, you have as a participant in an evaluation, you generate, you're learning things. You're learning about evaluation, learning about why we do evaluation, how we do evaluation. And so then you have this, has this individual increase in their knowledge, but then they're able to share it and, kind of share it along the way. So you're learning, but you're also sharing as you go along. You're generating this sense of collective knowledge. And then part of this is, part of process principles are evidence-based strategies. So when you're thinking about, when you're doing evaluation, and you're thinking about how you're going to, use evaluation, well, a lot of times we're using evidence-based strategies kind of as a part and parcel of the evaluation itself. So the idea is to use kind of best evaluation practices, I guess I want to get what this is getting at. And then there's accountability. So everyone is, people are accountable to each other for the success of the evaluation. So the outcome principles are, what is supposed to result from the evaluation. And so there's this sense of improvement. So whatever it is that's being evaluated, there's a sense that you're trying to improve the processes or the functions or the outcomes or the impacts of whatever it is for the sake of social justice. Then there's a sense of organizational learning, so that the outcome, organizational learning means that a group of people have used data to learn something, to learn something that they once they've learned it, they can share it, they can use it, for other purposes. Then there's sort of, again, this idea of social justice. Okay, the outcome of empowerment evaluation is social justice. You're running people through this evaluation process so that they can influence social policy. And then, of course, capacity building. So like we talked a little bit about, when people are, one of the outcomes of going through an evaluation process is you're learning knowledge, and you're developing knowledge about evaluation, and you're developing skills which are all about, it's all about capacity. When you have knowledge and we have skills, you have capacity. So from the inception, there's been, in terms of the actual implementation of empowerment evaluation, there's a process or a models. Okay, there are very specific steps to follow. Okay, and so the first model was something called the 3-step model, and then the second model that came along, and again the second model, the 10-step model, and the 5-tool model are all basically have the original 3-step model. Those steps are embedded in the 10-step and then the 5-tool models. So you can see from 94 to 2010, there's been kind of an evolution. All right, so and regardless of which model that you use or you implement, the idea is that the process principles and the outcome principles are if you're going to do it the right way, then those principles will be in evidence. Okay, so each one of these models is very specific, and each of them provides the basis for contemporary empowerment evaluation practice. So you can choose, depending on the situation that you're in, you can choose if And this is not to say that empowerment evaluation is the only evaluation approach out there. We know that that's not, we know that it's true that there are other approaches to conducting evaluations. But if the conditions are right for an empowerment evaluation, then if so, and if the desire is to use, to help people build their evaluation capacity so they can, once they've completed whatever evaluation they're part of, and they can do other evaluations. But the idea is to be able to help them to generate their own knowledge, their own data, to use that data to influence social policy for the sake of social justice. So, but whatever, so you can choose amongst these three different models, or you can decide which, use steps from one and steps from the other and steps from the third if you so desire. But the idea is that these models are basically the three models of empowerment evaluation. Okay, so what are the concerns about empowerment evaluation? Well, there's, even though there's three models, and there's activities, if you want to call it that, embedded within those models, we don't really know. There isn't really, a prescriptive that says, okay, how you actually do this. There isn't like a, okay, do this. If you're using a three-step model, do this, 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 and this. If you're using a 5-tool model, make sure you're doing these things. No, the models give you this. Here's what it looks like. Here's what you should be doing, but it doesn't tell you how to do it. Okay. There's an absence of rigorous evidence to show that it is empowering and leads to empowered outcomes. Okay. The evidence of its effectiveness is basically suggestive, because there's not a lot of, there haven't been not any studies that looked at at the outcomes of empowerment evaluation. So, so the evidence of its effectiveness, and effectiveness in a sense is empowerment evaluation leads to empowerment and self-determination, but it's mostly suggestive. It's not preponderant, and it's pretty much inconclusive. The outcomes are difficult to operationalize and assess. And even if they were measurable, they may be unrealistic for some smaller scale or short-term projects. So what that means is that, how do you know that empowerment, self-determination resulted? How do you measure that if you're an evaluator and you're conducting empowerment evaluation, you have a group of people that are participating, that are, a collective. How do you measure whether they're becoming empowered and self-determined? It's hard to operationalize that as you're going through an empowerment evaluation. Again, it brings up the question of how you measure the success. How you measure it is challenging. Okay. Can you give people scales and, empowerment scales and self-determination scales? Because they are out there, that is for sure. But how do you, do you like give them these scales at the beginning of the evaluation until, kind of give it to repeated measure style, but there's no, how do you know when the beginning is, and how do you know when you're in the middle, and how do you know when you're at the end? So most, when you think about empowerment evaluation, most practitioners, and it's a practitioner focused, approach. They focused on whether, the organizations and the people involved can learn evaluation skills and successfully develop, launch, and utilize their own evaluations of their programs, rather than on measuring empowerment and self-determination outcomes, which speaks to, the idea that it's hard to operationalize empowerment and self-determination as you're conducting an empowerment evaluation. So that's a criticism. So why it's necessary, why research is necessary, why it was necessary. Like we say that, it's the outcomes, have been widely acknowledged, but no one's studied it. If they have, it's been very superficial or ignored altogether. The quality of empowerment evaluations implementation resides in the extent to which persuasive evidence can be provided to examine the claims it makes. Okay, so basically, there's no evidence. We don't. So we say, the people who conduct empowerment evaluations say, well, that people that are involved are becoming empowered and self-determined. Well, there's no evidence to that. There's no evidence to support that claim. Okay, so and it's this idea of empowerment evaluations. It's just a little bit fuzzy. We don't know, when people are, how they're developing, what skills they're developing. There's no measure of the skills they develop either. So we don't really know these things. We don't know, here's this approach, people are taking part in evaluations, but you're not measuring empowerment and self-determination. You're not really measuring the capacity that they're building in terms of their evaluation skills. So it's really kind of theoretical and fuzzy. So what, part of this idea is that, well, because we don't have a lot of information about empowerment evaluation in practice, in terms of the outcomes, then there needs to be a thorough accounting, of how obtaining skills and, is actually empowering. Okay, how, so we don't know the connection between the developing the skills and the knowledge and self-efficacy to conduct evaluations, and how that translates into empowerment and self-determination. So last couple of things. Okay, so some authors have called for a closer examination of research and evaluations that claim to have produced empowerment and by extension self-determination. There's a small number of studies. There's a very small number of studies, original research on stakeholder involvement, which reflects really a dearth of empirical research on evaluation and specifically empowerment evaluation. So we haven't really looked at stakeholder involvement in evaluations on any real level. Okay. So the research questions, let's get into the study because we don't have a lot of time left. So my questions were, what was the extent to which evaluation practitioners adhered with fidelity to the 3-step model, 10-step model, and the 5-tool model? Okay. What was the extent to which the 6 process principles and the 4 outcome principles, what was the extent to which they were in evidence either during the evaluation or as a result of the evaluation? And then research question 4, which is broken down into 5 kind of sub-questions. And this is the kind of the empirical aspect of the study. To what extent could variation in empowerment and self-determination be explained by, and what I mean is, what, can we show that empowerment and self-determination are the likely result of the interaction between empowerment evaluation model fidelity and the percentage of activities implemented? Okay, because if you're conducting an empowerment model, whichever one it is, if you're doing it the way it's supposed to be done, then you're adhering with fidelity to it, right? And if you do adhere with fidelity, if you implement all, a good majority of the activities embedded in that model, then empowerment and self-determination should be a result, right? Stands to figure. The interaction between empowerment evaluation, model fidelity, and the percentage of activities implemented during the early, mid, and late phases of an empowerment evaluation. So you've got, like I said, it's empowerment evaluation is kind of or any evaluation is kind of on a continuum from a start, a middle, and an end. And so, you're going to look at, when you're doing the sort of the beginning phases of your study, and you're doing, the steps in the beginning of the study, the steps in the middle of the study, and the steps at the end of the study, does it make any difference as to, whether what you're doing in the middle, beginning, and end, does it matter what you're doing, and how does that play into, how does that foster empowerment, self-determination? Is there, what role does do the process principles, have on empowerment, self-determination? What impact or what role, what influence do the outcome principles, have on empowerment and self-determination? And then what influences do demographic variables have on empowerment and self-determination? So there's kind of five things here. One has to do with the model and implementing the models, whichever model is chosen with fidelity, doing all the activities that are part and parcel of those models. Then the principles, the process principles, the outcome principles, and then demographics. So it's kind of those variables that when you break empowerment evaluation apart, that that should, if you're doing things, you're doing all the activities, and you're adhering to all the principles, then according to theory, empowerment and self-determination should result. Okay, so here's the methodology. Basically, 92 item self-report online survey consisting of Likert type and open-ended questions. So kind of a mixed methods study. So the, item development, I basically constructs found in the literature about the 3 known empowerment evaluation models and their respective implementation steps and activities, the 10 principles of empowerment evaluation as outlined in the literature, the purported empowerment self-determination outcomes for individuals and organizations engaged in the process of empowerment evaluation discussed in the literature. So you can see that all of this is grounded in literature, right? This is the constructs found in the social psychology literature regarding empowerment theory and self-determination theory, both on the individual and collective levels. So the good thing about this is that I'll tell you that the study was based on a study conducted by Miller and Rebecca Miller and who was the other one? I can't. This is anyway, but there was a precedent study. Okay, and the 2 researchers who did the precedent study on empowerment evaluation were the ones who did the did a validity check on the items that I created for my survey. So it's really bothered me. I can't remember who the other Rebecca Miller and geez, okay, it'll come to me. It'll come to me eventually. So here's the design of the evaluation. What's important here is you can kind of see the sections, how it's broken down. And so, and then what it shows you is, because I'm doing kind of empirical research after I get through the descriptives and the exploratory phase, and I use that information, for the empirical study, to answer the questions about the influences of models and principles and demographics on empowerment and self-determination. But in order to do that, you had to develop scales, taking the survey items and developing certain scales that addressed each of those constructs and subconstructs. So, and that takes into consideration the activities of the evaluator, the activities of the people involved, the participants, okay, the changes that that the evaluators saw in individual values related to evaluation in those who are participating, changes observed in individual behaviors. So it's just there's kind of a changes in values and changes in behaviors related to evaluation. Okay, changes observed within the organization in which the evaluation is taking place. The inclusiveness of the participants, whether or not everyone who wanted to be included was included, the evaluators' accountability to the people that were the participants and the organization in which the evaluation was taking place, evaluation model used, and then demographic information. So then there's each of these sections designed, the information collected from those items is designed to answer one of the four research questions. Okay, so analytical strategy. So the unit of analysis is the evaluation practitioner, because the evaluation practitioner creates the context. Remember I said we don't empower or self-determine anyone. We create the context in which, as a social intervention, we create a context in which empowerment, hopefully empowerment and self-determination are going to develop. Okay. So it's the, creates the empowerment, the evaluation context conducive to development of empowerment, self-determination, and the person adheres to those principles. The evaluator does the steps of the model and adheres to the principles. And so that's why the evaluator is the unit of analysis. And then the descriptive statistics were used to determine the extent to which evaluation practitioners adhered with fidelity to the steps of the empowerment evaluation model they implemented, the extent to which the process principles were reported to be in evidence during the evaluations reported on by the evaluation practitioners. So again, this is all kind of self-report, right? And the extent to which the outcome principles were reported to have resulted from the evaluations reported on by evaluation practitioners. So again, all self-report, and you can kind of see where this is where there's certainly potential for bias. Okay, the last analytical strategy is multiple regression, and used to determine the extent to which variation in the four empowerment subconstructs, individual empowerment construct, the three self-determination subconstructs, the individual self-determination construct, and the organizational empowerment and self-determination construct could be explained by, I kind of went through this before, but I'll just kind of reiterate. So the interaction between empowerment evaluation model fidelity and percentage of activities implemented, okay? The interaction between empowerment evaluation model fidelity and percentage of activities implemented during the early, mid, and late phases of the empowerment evaluation. And if you want to see the particulars, you want to see the actual data, just let me know and I will send you the data. The process principles reported to be in evidence during the empowerment evaluations, the outcome principles that resulted from the empowerment evaluations, and then empowerment evaluator demographic variables such as the demographics, and then there's academic and professional characteristics such as gender, number of years conducting empowerment evaluations, degrees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I was not really sure I wasn't sure that they would have an impact, but you never know, right? So sampling rationale, non-probabilistic, it's all self-selected, it's all purposive, I can never say this, purposive, and not dependent on the rationale of probability theory. Basically, the idea is to, if an evaluation practitioner had conducted an empowerment or an empowering evaluation in the 5 years during a 5-year period prior to the study, implementing the study, then they were included in as as part of the sample. And when I say empowering evaluations, some people are doing empowerment evaluations. They're implementing the models, or they're doing activities which are analogous to those activities in those 3 empowerment evaluations models, but they didn't necessarily call it empowerment evaluation. Same thing, just a different nomenclature and a different label, but basically the same thing. So in building the sample, I used a lot of techniques. Basically, this is, I'm going to leave this up here for a minute. Basically what I did is I used all the evaluation groups that I was part of, and I started culling out, looking for, people who were likely to have conducted empowerment evaluation. And then I started snowball sampling. Well, have you conducted one? Do you know anybody who has conducted one? I ended up with 232 people. And then I used different networks, and I basically, all the names I got through these networks, and I cross-checked against, my initial samples. And, so basically at the end of this, I sort of reconciled names and contact information, and I ended up with a sample of 615 evaluation practitioners. So again, you're building in a sample through, through organizations, and then through networks, and kind of taking, kind of merging those different processes, the outcomes of those different processes, to come up with a fairly complete list of people, 615 evaluation practitioners who might have or are likely to have conducted an empowerment evaluation. And, like I say, this is it. Empowerment evaluation is kind of a niche. Because there's people who gravitate to the values branch of the evaluation tree, people who gravitate towards more ideological evaluation approaches are more inclined to do participatory, collaborative, stakeholder involved evaluation approaches, of which empowerment evaluation is one, right? So, 615 is a reasonable number, I think, for, as far as a kind of a census, the full census of people who have conducted empowerment evaluations across the world over time. Okay, so let's see. So I just want to show you this. This shows you the groups and potential number of respondents. Okay, so you've got 3 AEA groups, you got 4 listservs, 19 LinkedIn groups, 5 Yahoo groups, 39 Facebook communities, and so the total potential is 156,407 people. And like I said, the first 615, you figure that would be the census. But in fact, there might be almost 160,000 people in the world who might have conducted an empowerment evaluation. Do I think that was likely? No, but on the other hand, it certainly is possible, right? So this is total. Again, this is likely it's duplicated head count because people belong to multiple groups, right? But it's theoretically possible that this is I figure that 615 is the full census, but potentially it's 156,000, right? So anyway, so data collection, I used, Dillman's principles, sent the survey out, it's an online survey, went through the whole IRB process, right? got permission. It ended up being a very minimal risk study, because there wasn't anything that I was going to ask. I wasn't going to do anything harmful. Wasn't going to ask anybody questions which would trigger some kind of emotional response. So it was pretty much expedited. So I just want to make that clear, that make sure that that I was conducting this in an ethical manner. Okay, that I was adhering to making sure that my human research subjects were fully protected. So once I got IRB approval and I was able to move forward, okay, then I was able to send out my sort of kind of go through this kind of contacting people. So after there was a recruitment phase, right? So I went through did send a message to all the groups that I showed you, the 3 AEA groups and the LinkedIn and all that. So I sent a message, okay. So just to recruit people. But then once I really launched it, okay, I went through emails and LinkedIn and Facebook messaging, and then kind of diffusely contacting potential subject study participants via groups used in the recruitment of the survey, with the survey link embedded, and resulting in 500 total respondents. That's not bad. When you think about it, considering, you have a potential for 156,000 people, even if duplicated headcount, you figure, well, I should get more than 512 people, but okay. Then going back to my original attempt at building the sample and coming up with 615 potential participants, 512, it's pretty reasonable, I think. So from study launch to the first reminder, I had 112 respondents. From the first to the second reminder, 140 additional respondents, 107 after the next to the final reminder, and at the final reminder, and I ended up with 162 additional respondents. Okay, so that should add up to 512. But with response rates, sorry about that. It's difficult to calculate an accurate response rate, because both direct and indirect and diffuse recruitment methods were used. So, when all said and done, 131 people responded fully. Okay, they provided usable data. So, based on the 520, it said 521. I'm not sure, there's a little discrepancy here. Be that as it may, it ended up being about a 25% response rate, because 131 out of the five, I think it's 500. I think that's a typo. I think the bottom one's a typo. 131 out of 512. 25%. That's pretty reasonable. Okay, so ideally you want 100%, but you know how these things go. There's not going to be that like that. So anyway, so here are the participant characteristics. 99 of 131 respondents, provided 76% reported their demographic, the academic preparation, professional characteristics. So 58.3% English speaking, that's the primary language. 59.8% white, non-Hispanic, 67% female. An average of 15 years in the field of evaluation, average of 11 years conducting empowerment evaluations. That was something. I didn't quite expect that. 52% lived in a North American country. 51.1% conducted empowerment evaluations in a North American country. 20% conducted empowerment evaluations in an African country. Okay. 48.5% held a PhD, 38.4% held a master's degree. And if the fields, the academic fields varied. So, you would imagine social sciences, right? So, pretty decent percentage monitoring and evaluation. Some just do research, some are doing public health, other kind of academic pursuits like international development. So mostly the majority of people, or not the majority, but the largest percentage of respondents, their field of endeavor is social sciences. Makes sense. And then professional areas of expertise, monitoring, evaluation, research, not surprising, the largest percentage. Then there's, split evenly, development and social justice. Let's see, respectively, action and community-based research, health, and social sciences. So, it's kind of a split, But it's not surprising that a lot of people are monitoring, evaluation, and doing research. Okay, so model fidelity. What do we got? Well, okay, so 3-step model, majority. Majority did, 92.2% of respondents adhered with fidelity to the model, that the 3-step model. If there's, you can tell how many people, 129 people, right, implemented the 3-step model. And so, not right, no, yes. And so, it's very, basically, when we say fidelity, we say, there's all these, each model, like a model has, I had to tease out, I had to break apart the activities. And so based on those, based on breaking it out, it may not have been a perfect process, but I broke them down into the activities, and then, created an item for each of those activities, so that you get a whole, once you have, ask a question about each of those activities, and you get a good idea about the entirety of the model. And if you have a certain number of, you've done, you've agreed or strongly agree that you've done, a majority of those activities, then it's clear that you've adhered with fidelity to the model that you chose, right? So people implemented the 5-tool model, 90.6%. And then it's interesting because the fidelity to the 5-tool model, which is the newest, only 79.7%, but still a majority of people, adhering with fidelity to those models. Okay. Process principles. These are the principles that the empowerment evaluator had to see for him or herself actually taking place. As you're doing the evaluation, these are the principles which come to the fore. So there's the community ownership process principle. You can see, and if you want a copy of my survey, just let me know and I will send you the copy of the survey. So you can see the items, how each item addresses each of these constructs and the sub-constructs. So you've got the community ownership principle. 93.8% of evaluators said that was evident. 74.2% said that the inclusiveness process principle was in evidence, which is kind of surprising to me. I would have thought that, if you're the evaluator, you would, and you're guiding, mentoring, and coaching evaluation participants through this evaluation, that you would know, you'd be more focused in on who was taking part and who wasn't, who was included and who wasn't included. So that was a little surprising. 82.5% indicated that the democratic participation process principle was, in fact, in place, that was manifested, which makes sense. I mean, you could, I guess maybe it's hard to know when these things are, it's kind of hard to know, what, how community ownership manifests itself. or how inclusive it manifests itself. So it's an imperfect measure because you're relying on the evaluator to tell you whether they thought that they saw these principles kind of in place or taking place as throughout the evaluation. So it could be an issue in definition. What does community ownership really mean, and how do I know that community ownership is taking place? So that's kind of a drawback of this. Community knowledge process principle, 79.3%, 74.2%, evidence-based strategies, and 70.2% accountability process principles. So they're in the, there's no spacing here. I'm sorry about that. Okay, back up here. Yeah, so you've got fidelity to the, model fidelity, we don't care about that. We're talking about, so maybe it's because community ownership and democratic participation are more readily observable than, say, inclusiveness, community knowledge, evidence-based strategies, or accountability process, accountability. So some things are observable, some things less observable. Okay. So now the outcome, what outcome principles were in evidence? Again, so you've got the improvement outcome principle, 90.5%. That's pretty good. Organizational learning, 85.9%. 86.2% said that the social justice outcome principle was evident, and then resulted from the evaluations that they reported on, and then capacity building, 57.7%. So they were unclear whether or not people who are participating in the evaluation were actually learning evaluation skills or developing evaluation knowledge. Again, these are hard. You're asking an evaluator to kind of make a judgment about whether these things were the outcome of the evaluation that they were reporting on. These things are hard. I would be hard pressed to tell you if these things were in fact results, because I'm not because I don't necessarily know what social justice is supposed to look like or what capacity building is supposed to look like. So again, I broke down these sub constructs of this outcome principle is the construct. All these four outcomes are the sub constructs. And again, items asking people if they saw these things resulting from their evaluations. Again, difficult to say. Okay, so research question 1. What I thought would happen, I thought that they wouldn't adhere with fidelity to the models that they chose. However, based on my measure of fidelity, okay, they adhered with fidelity to all 3 models. Okay, based on the literature, I thought the more readily observable process principles of community ownership, inclusion, and democratic participation would be evident, and that the community knowledge, evidence-based strategies, and accountability wouldn't be evident. But apparently they reported that all 6 process principles were evident during the poverty evaluation they reported on. And then research question 3 was, I thought that that the majority of evaluation practitioners would report that improvement in capacity building were evident, but the more distal outcomes of organizational learning and social justice would not be evident. But in fact, all four outcome principles were evident to them. Okay, that's good. All right, now I'm gonna, because for the sake of time, and I'm kind of running over a little bit here. So I wanted to know if we could explain any variation in empowerment evaluation and empowerment and self-determination could be explained by the interaction between empowerment evaluation model fidelity and percentage of activities implemented. Okay, so what I'm actually going to do, you'll have the slides. I'm actually going to go. I'll just go and I'll kind of set it up, and then we'll get to the kind of last slide of this section to actually talk about the implications. Okay. So, okay, the second question, second of 5 under sort of question research question 4. What was the extent to which what was the extent that variation in empowerment self-determination could be explained by the interaction between empowerment evaluation, model fidelity, and the percentage of activities implemented during the early, mid, and late phases of the empowerment evaluation? Does it make a difference when, what you're doing at the beginning, at the middle, and at the end? And does that explain any empowerment evaluation or empowerment or self-determination that is taking place? Okay. The third sub-question is, to what extent could variation in empowerment self-determination be explained by the process principles reported to be in evidence during the evaluations reported on? Okay. All right. What was the extent to the sub-question 4.4? To what extent could variation, empowerment, and self-determination be explained by the outcome principles that resulted from the evaluations reported on? Okay. And sub-question 4.5, to what extent could variation in empowerment and self-determination be explained by empowerment evaluation, evaluator demographic, academic, and professional characteristics? Okay. Okay, so you'll have the slides so you can look at them. And okay, let's see. All right, so okay, this is interesting. So not tested. Okay, well, let's see. Let me go up here. Okay, so what are the implications for evaluation practice and policy based on research question 4? Okay, this is really the money. This is the money part of this presentation, because the other aspect of the other aspects are interesting: model fidelity, process principles, outcome principles. Okay, so we know that those things are taking place. Models are being adhered to with fidelity. We know that process principles and outcome principles are, which distinguish empowerment evaluation from other stakeholder approaches to evaluation, are evident. Okay, so we know that that empowerment evaluations are taking place. So the question is, once you use the model fidelity, and you use the principles, to explain, can you use them to explain whether or not empowerment and self-determination are the result of empowerment evaluations? Well, so if building evaluation capacity is important, so what you need to do is implement a high percentage of activities to ensure model fidelity, especially during the mid phase of empowerment evaluation, which makes sense because that's the beginning phase is when things are starting up. The end, towards the end, things are kind of winding down. The middle phase is the meat, if you want to call it that, of the evaluation. Okay, so if you want evaluation capacity, then you implement a high percentage of the activities to ensure model fidelity. In other words, if there's 7 activities in the three-step model, well, then you adhere to as many of those, the majority of those activities as much as possible, right? So, and you also, if you want to build evaluation, evaluation capacity building is important. Attend to the inclusiveness process principle to ensure everyone who wants to be fully engaged in the evaluation is included, okay? So if building evaluation and knowledge is important, and you'll notice evaluation capacity is part of, right? It's part of empowerment. It's part of being, it's part of self-determination, right? So if building evaluation knowledge, which is part of empowerment, part of the empowerment construct, is important, attend to the inclusive process principle to ensure everyone who wants to be fully engaged in the evaluation is included. Remember, we talk about in empowerment evaluation, there's this idea of collective knowledge, right? So if people are included and they're sharing their knowledge about their newfound knowledge about evaluation, they're sharing that knowledge amongst themselves because they're included in the evaluation, that's going to increase the collective knowledge that they are able to, that they have. So, and then you're also attending to the, community knowledge process principle. So, so they can, everyone who's engaged in the evaluation can use their collective wisdom to develop evaluation tools, evaluation procedures, interpret data. So knowledge, evaluation knowledge comes from the inclusion, and it comes from this community knowledge process. So, which pretty much stands to reason, I think. If building evaluation competence is important, and competence and capacity are similar concepts, okay? So again, you tend to the inclusiveness process principle, okay? So you can say it's like inclusiveness is really important in building evaluation capacity. Inclusiveness is important in building evaluation knowledge. It's important in building evaluation competence. Whoops, wait a second here. What happened? Okay. If individual empowerment is important, again, it's about inclusiveness. So inclusiveness really cuts across all the the empowerment self-determination construct, but also all the sub-constructs as well. Okay, let's see. Yeah, okay, that's right. So those are, but the reason why these four, capacity, knowledge, competence, and individual empowerment, because those are the significant findings. Those are the significant influences that resulted from the multiple regression analysis. Okay, so, but these are the, you can go back and look at the slides, but those are the significant findings. Okay, so, but it's, you look at it, it's really inclusiveness that is really, that's what's significant about this. So, okay. So the strengths of this study, the strength of the study as I see them, determining which steps, activities of the three empowerment evaluation models have been applied in actual evaluation practice. No one has, remember, vague contingencies for practice. Well, now we can pretty much know that what people are doing, which activities they're actually implementing. Operationalizing the steps of the three empowerment evaluation models as evaluation practitioner and evaluation participant activities. So breaking these models down and showing exactly what you're, because again, they contingencies for practice, showing exactly what activities you do in these models in order to adhere with fidelity to the model. Defining empowerment evaluation model fidelity, developing a model fidelity index, and measuring model fidelity. First, that's kind of a first time for that. Operational, the empowerment evaluation process and outcome principles as evaluation practitioner and evaluation participant activities. It's all based on some kind of action and behaviors. Remember that. Remember we said empowerment and self-determination. It's when you're empowered, when you're self-determined, it's the manifestation of those constructs is about the behaviors that you exhibit, okay? Or behaviors you perform. Developing an index for determining evidence of the principles and determining whether the principles were in evidence during and as a result of the empowerment evaluations reported on by evaluation practitioners. Defining the subconstructs and constructs of empowerment theory and self-determination and adapting them to empowerment evaluation without losing validity. Okay. Then explaining variation in empowerment and self-determination by empowerment evaluation model fidelity, evidence of empowerment evaluation process and outcome principles, and evaluation practitioner demographic, academic, and professional characteristics. So some of the limitations obviously are self-selection. It calls into question the extent to which the evaluation practitioners in the sample were equivalent to other evaluation practitioners who conduct empowerment evaluations. Don't know. Social desirability calls into question the accuracy of responses. Okay. See, for example, the model fidelity scores. Okay. So again, everyone's scoring high. Is it a social desirability effect? Don't know. Study participants claim and over-report activities which are socially desirable. Self-deception, a respondent believes a statement to be true of herself, even though it is inaccurate. So those are the, things, if you're being asked to report on the empowerment evaluations that you're conducting, well, you want to be seen, and this is a study, it's a study about empowerment evaluation and the results thereof, or purported results thereof, well, then you're likely to want to report that you're doing empowerment evaluation the way it's supposed to be done. And then, of course, the reliability of the instrument itself. It had, based on going through a process of content validation with, the experts in empowerment evaluation, it's, not enough observations to really determine, how, to really conduct an adequate reliability analysis. So further refinement result in testing, certainly including a factor analysis to establish its reliability and predictability is absolutely necessary. Okay, so recommendations for future research on empowerment evaluation: develop and validate or adapt existing empowerment and self-determination scales so evaluation practitioners can measure the empowerment and self-determination of individuals and organizations with whom they work. Instruments should be able to discriminate between individual empowerment and self-determination subconstructs and organizational empowerment and self-determination constructs, because there's collective empowerment and self-determination and individual self-determination empowerment. So you have to need a tool that can discriminate between them. Measure the empowerment and self-determination of empowerment evaluation participants before, during, and post-evaluation, as well as distal outcomes of empowerment evaluation, the extent to which social policy was influenced towards favorable outcomes, the extent to which power differentials were equalized. So you need to measure that over time. Create and test a theory of change model, including moderators and mediators showing the likely pathways from empowerment evaluation model implementation and the process and outcome principles to individual and organizational empowerment and self-determination. So there should be a model that shows how these, how change takes place over time, from the time you as participant starts in the evaluation to the time this participant gets through the evaluation. Test whether there is a relationship between models and principles, the extent to which a relationship exists, and whether model fidelity along a continuum or evidence of the principles along a continuum attenuates that relationship. Explore the role of contextual variables in the development, enhancement of empowerment and self-determination by comparing the outcomes of empowerment evaluations conducted in different countries. Okay, so yeah, so maybe it's kind of like a criterion validation in a way. Okay, conclusions. Okay, so here it is. To a limited extent, individual empowerment and evaluation were the likely outcomes of the empowerment evaluations reported on by this sample of 131 evaluation practitioners. Model fidelity, the inclusiveness and community knowledge process principles, and evaluation practitioner characteristics appear to have been able to explain variation. So it's model fidelity, adhering with fidelity to a model, including participants, generating this sense of community knowledge, and some certain characteristics, some individual characteristics of the evaluator. Those are the things that seem to influence the development of empowerment and self-determination. Given evidence of all 10 guiding principles, as we know that the 10 principles are what distinguish empowerment evaluation from other kinds of ideological evaluation approaches. Given the fact that these 10 guiding principles were in evidence, the evaluations reported on were likely to be empowerment evaluations, regardless of what anybody else called them. Okay. The evaluation practitioners in this study largely adhered with fidelity to the steps of the model fidelity they implemented. No model was privileged over another, as steps were chosen from across all 3 models. Okay. Evaluation practitioner personal, academic, and professional characteristics did not fully factor, and I kind of skipped over that whole slide on their characteristics because it wasn't, it was just kind of a, I didn't use regression. Did I use regression? Yeah, I did. But there wasn't any, the findings were kind of inconclusive, right? So evaluation practitioner, personal, academic, and professional characteristics did not fully factor into the empowerment of individuals and organizations and the organizations with whom they worked. However, evaluation knowledge, individual empowerment, and all 3 individual self-determination subcontracts, that's competence, autonomy, and relatedness, appeared to have been correlated both positively and negatively with empowerment evaluations conducted by evaluation practitioners who lived and worked in an African country, who were female, and who conducted empowerment evaluations also in another country beyond the country their primary country in which they worked. So being female and living, so there's a relationship between being female and living and working in an African country or another country. There's a relationship between those demographics and those, sort of individual evaluator variables and evaluation knowledge, individual empowerment, and self-determination. So it's indicative. I'm not sure exactly what, you can't say anything really conclusive, but there's a relationship. So take that as you may, okay? The SIPO, which is the survey that I created, was successful first attempt at providing a practical, largely quantitative tool to empowerment to empowerment evaluators interested in assessing the process and outcomes of their work, less so actual empowerment and self-determination. Okay. Oops. All right. So here is my personal information. And like I say, you will have these slides. Okay. So there we go. That is pretty much it for today's presentation. It went a little bit longer than I had anticipated, but I wanted you to have the full range of my, usually in presentations you get half an hour, 45 minutes, but I wanted you to have the full range. And so I wanted to provide you with the full full perspective. Like I say, you will have the slides and you can look at all the statistics, from my analyses. But anyway, that's it. I think as a first study, I mean, certainly I would have done things perhaps a little bit differently, like I said, in the limitation section. But I think overall, I think it's a good first study, a first attempt at looking at taking a real critical look at empowerment evaluation. It resonates with a lot of people. It's popular, okay. But we really do need to know whether or not the purported outcomes, actually are the purported outcomes, or maybe something else is an outcome. But but with anything, with any approach, you need to kind of pull it apart. You need to analyze it. You need to evaluate it to see whether it works the way it's supposed to work. And I for one, I'm an idealist. I'm of the values orientation. I'm on the values branch of the evaluation tree. That's where I reside. I'm much more of a constructivist, a critical theorist. So I firmly believe in empowerment evaluation and what it can do. So, but I've always been curious to see if what it purports to do, it actually can do. And I think on balance, based on limitations, based on, sample size, I think it's a good start. I think it's indicative that empowerment evaluation is a good approach, in trying to recalibrate some of the issues we have with predominant social norms that are oppressive and marginalizing. So we take it as what it is, the first a first study, and then build on that study. Okay, so hopefully you're inclined, to take what I've done and do it better, right? Do it better and find out more about empowerment evaluation, that we might improve empowerment evaluation. Okay, if it's because it's something that I believe in, I hopefully you do too. All right, well, listen, take care. It's been a great pleasure to present this to you and to talk with you about these things. And I'm sorry I didn't get the slides. The slide sharing thing didn't quite work out the way that I had intended it to, but like I say, I'll send you the slides, and if you want the slides, do let me know. Okay, I will get them to you. I'll include them in when I send the link to the conference. I will include the slides as well. But if for some reason you don't get them, I will certainly send them to you. All right. So good luck in your evaluation endeavors, and I hope to see you somewhere down the road. All right. Take care. Bye-bye.